Welcome to a journey through the entire history of human civilization. From the earliest ancient societies to the modern world, this story spans thousands of years of discovery, conflict, and progress. If you enjoy learning about history, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. Chapter 1: The First Humans, 300,000 BCE to 10,000 BCE. Long before the first cities rose from the earth, before kings ruled vast lands, and before empires stretched across continents, the world belonged to nature alone. Mountains towered untouched, rivers flowed freely across wild landscapes, and enormous animals roamed across plains and forests. Human civilization had not yet begun, but the foundations of that future were quietly taking shape. Around 300,000 BCE, in the vast and varied landscapes of Africa, a new species emerged. These early humans were known as Homo sapiens. They were not the strongest creatures in the wilderness, nor the fastest, nor the most physically powerful. Yet they possessed something far more important. They had minds capable of imagination, cooperation, and learning. These abilities would eventually allow them to transform the entire planet. In those distant ages, life for early humans was simple but extremely difficult. They lived as hunter-gatherers, relying completely on the natural world for survival. Each day was shaped by the search for food and shelter. Small groups traveled across the land, following migrating animals and seasonal plants. Their communities were small, often consisting of only a few dozen individuals. Within these groups, every person played a role in survival. Some hunted animals using sharpened stone tools and primitive spears. Others gathered fruits, roots, seeds, and edible plants from the surrounding land. Children learned by watching their elders, slowly acquiring the knowledge needed to survive in a dangerous world. Nature was both their provider and their greatest threat. The Earth during this period was very different from the world we know today. Massive glaciers covered large portions of the northern continents. Vast ice sheets stretched across North America and northern Europe during the long cycles of the Ice Age. The climate shifted constantly between colder and warmer periods, forcing animals and humans alike to adapt or move. To survive these conditions, early humans needed more than strength. They needed intelligence and cooperation. One of the most important discoveries in early human history was the controlled use of fire. Fire provided warmth during cold nights and protection from predators lurking in the darkness. It also allowed humans to cook their food, making meat and plants easier to digest and more nutritious. This simple discovery had enormous consequences. Cooked food required less energy to chew and digest, allowing the human body to devote more resources to brain development. Over thousands of generations, this may have contributed to the growth of the human brain and the increasing complexity of human societies. But fire also created something else that would become essential to civilization. It created the first gatherings. When night fell and darkness covered the land, human groups gathered around glowing flames. In those quiet moments, stories were told, knowledge was shared. The experiences of one generation were passed to the next. These early stories helped humans understand the world around them. They explained the behavior of animals, the movement of stars, and the dangers of the wilderness. In this way, storytelling became one of the earliest tools of survival. Over thousands of years, humans slowly improved their tools. Simple stone implements evolved into more refined blades, spearheads, and cutting instruments. These innovations allowed hunters to bring down larger animals and process food more efficiently. Human creativity was growing. Around 70,000 BCE, a remarkable transformation occurred in human culture. Archaeological evidence suggests that humans began expressing themselves through art, symbolism, and complex craftsmanship. Cave walls were covered with paintings depicting animals, hunting scenes, and mysterious symbols. These artworks were not simply decoration. They reveal that early humans were capable of abstract thought. They could imagine ideas that did not physically exist. They could communicate beliefs, myths, and traditions. This change marked a significant turning point in human development. With improved language and symbolic thinking, humans could share complex information. They could organize hunts more effectively. They could cooperate with larger groups. Knowledge could be preserved and passed across generations. Human societies became more flexible and adaptive than ever before. During this time, humans also began one of the greatest migrations in the history of life on Earth. Around 60,000 BCE, groups of Homo sapiens began leaving Africa and spreading into new territories. Some moved north into the Middle East, eventually reaching Europe. Others traveled east across Asia, adapting to forests, deserts, and mountains along the way. Over thousands of years, these migrations continued. Human populations slowly spread across the continents, reaching Australia and later the Americas. Each region presented new challenges, forcing people to develop new tools and survival strategies. In the frozen landscapes of northern regions, humans created clothing from animal hides to survive the cold. In coastal areas, they developed fishing tools and early boats. In forests and grasslands, they learned to track animals and gather wild plants. Every environment shaped the cultures that developed there. But as humans spread across the world, they were not alone. Other human species already lived in some of these regions. Among them were the Neanderthals, who occupied much of Europe and Western Asia. Neanderthals were powerful hunters with strong bodies adapted to cold climates. For thousands of years, Homo sapiens and Neanderthals lived at the same time. Sometimes they competed for resources. Sometimes they interacted peacefully. Modern genetic evidence suggests that these groups occasionally interbred, meaning that traces of Neanderthal DNA still exist in many people today. Yet by around 40,000 BCE, the Neanderthals had disappeared. The reasons remain uncertain. Changing climates may have reduced their habitats. Competition with Homo sapiens may have placed pressure on their populations. It is also possible that some Neanderthals were gradually absorbed into human populations through interbreeding. Whatever the cause, Homo sapiens eventually became the only surviving human species. For tens of thousands of years after this, human life remained largely the same. People continued to live in small groups, moving across the land in search of food. Their knowledge of the natural world deepened with each generation. They understood animal behavior, seasonal cycles, and the locations of water sources. Their survival depended on this knowledge. But slowly, a profound transformation was approaching. As humans observed plants growing and animals reproducing, they began to experiment with new ideas. Instead of only collecting wild plants, they began planting seeds in the soil. Instead of simply hunting animals, they began controlling their breeding and movement. These early experiments marked the beginning of agriculture. Around 10,000 BCE, the human relationship with nature began to change dramatically. Farming allowed people to produce food in larger quantities and remain in one place for longer periods. The age of constant wandering was beginning to fade. Soon, permanent villages would appear. Those villages would grow into towns and cities. Governments, laws, and organized religions would emerge. And from these foundations, the first civilizations would rise. The long journey of human civilization had only just begun. Chapter 2: The Agricultural Revolution and the First Settlements. 10,000 BCE to 3000 BCE. Around 10,000 BCE, the relationship between humans and the natural world began to change in a way that would permanently transform the future of our species. For tens of thousands of years, humans had lived as hunter-gatherers, constantly moving across the land in search of food. Their survival depended entirely on the rhythms of nature. But now, in several regions of the world, humans began experimenting with a new and revolutionary idea. Instead of simply gathering wild plants, they began planting seeds in the soil and returning later to harvest the crops they had grown. This development may have seemed small at first, but it marked the beginning of one of the most important transformations in human history. Historians now refer to this period as the Agricultural Revolution. The earliest farming communities appeared in a region known today as the Fertile Crescent, a vast arc of land stretching across parts of the modern Middle East. This region contained rich soil, mild climates, and several wild grains that could be cultivated by early farmers. Among these grains were early forms of wheat and barley, plants that would become essential to human diets for thousands of years. At first, farming was not easy. Early farmers had to learn through trial and error. They had to understand when to plant seeds, how much water crops needed, and how to protect fields from animals and harsh weather. Over many generations, their knowledge slowly improved. At the same time that humans were learning to cultivate plants, they also began domesticating animals. Instead of hunting wild animals, people started raising certain species near their settlements. Goats and sheep were among the first animals to be domesticated. Later, cattle and pigs would also become important to agricultural societies. Domesticated animals provided many advantages. They supplied meat, milk, and hides for clothing. Some animals could also help with labor, assisting in farming and transportation. These developments gradually made food supplies more stable than they had been during the hunter-gatherer era. With more reliable food sources, human populations began to grow. As populations increased, people could no longer wander endlessly across the landscape. Farming required individuals to stay close to their fields and livestock. Because of this, humans began building permanent homes and forming small villages. These early settlements were simple, often consisting of mud brick houses clustered together near fertile land and water sources. But even these modest villages represented something entirely new in human history. For the first time, large groups of people were living together in permanent communities. Life within these early villages was very different from the life of wandering hunter-gatherers. In hunter-gatherer societies, most people performed similar tasks related to survival. But in farming communities, new forms of work began to appear. Some individuals specialized in farming, while others focused on tool making, pottery, or construction. This gradual division of labor allowed communities to become more efficient and productive. As villages expanded, social structures became more complex. Leaders began emerging within communities, often individuals who were respected for their wisdom, strength, or ability to organize others. Religious beliefs also became more structured. Early farming societies often believed that natural forces such as rain, rivers, and the fertility of the land were controlled by powerful spiritual forces. These beliefs influenced many aspects of daily life. People performed rituals and ceremonies to ensure successful harvests and protect their communities from disaster. Temples and sacred spaces gradually appeared within some settlements, marking the early development of organized religion. As centuries passed, farming techniques improved. Irrigation systems were developed to bring water from rivers to fields. Tools became more advanced, allowing farmers to cultivate larger areas of land. Surpluses of food began to accumulate within growing communities. Food surpluses changed everything. When societies produced more food than they immediately needed, they gained the ability to support people who were not directly involved in farming. Artisans, traders, priests, and administrators could now exist within these communities. This diversity of roles allowed villages to grow into larger and more complex settlements. Gradually, some villages transformed into the world's first cities. One of the earliest examples of this transformation occurred in the region of Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. In this fertile environment, irrigation agriculture allowed settlements to expand rapidly. Over time, large urban centers began to appear, including cities such as Uruk and Ur. These cities represented a new level of social organization. Thousands of people lived within their walls. Markets formed where goods could be traded. Temples and administrative buildings rose above the surrounding homes. Leaders developed systems to manage resources, organize labor, and maintain order within the growing populations. As societies became more complex, communication also became more important. In order to keep track of resources, trade, and laws, early civilizations began developing systems of writing. The earliest known writing system emerged in Mesopotamia around 3200 BCE. This system, known today as cuneiform, used wedge-shaped symbols pressed into clay tablets. Writing allowed information to be recorded and preserved. For the first time in history, knowledge could be stored outside the human mind. Laws, trade agreements, religious beliefs, and historical events could now be documented and passed to future generations with greater accuracy. Writing would eventually become one of the most powerful tools of civilization. Trade also expanded during this time. Early cities exchanged goods with neighboring regions, forming the first large trade networks. Materials such as metals, precious stones, timber, and textiles traveled across long distances. These networks connected distant communities and helped spread new technologies and cultural ideas. Meanwhile, other early civilizations were emerging in different parts of the world. Along the Nile River in northeastern Africa, farming communities gradually evolved into the powerful society known as Ancient Egypt. The predictable flooding of the Nile deposited rich soil along its banks, allowing Egyptian farmers to produce abundant crops. Further east, another remarkable society developed along the Indus River. The Indus Valley Civilization built carefully planned cities with straight streets, advanced drainage systems, and large public structures. Their urban planning suggests a highly organized society with sophisticated engineering knowledge. In East Asia, early agricultural societies along the Yellow River were also growing into complex civilizations that would eventually shape the history of China. Although these civilizations developed independently, they shared many similarities. All of them relied on agriculture, organized labor, and systems of governance to maintain order within growing populations. By 3000 BCE, humanity had crossed an important threshold. The world was no longer populated only by scattered groups of hunter-gatherers. Instead, powerful societies were beginning to form along fertile river valleys across multiple continents. Cities had appeared, writing had been invented, governments and religious institutions were taking shape. The foundations of civilization had been laid. In the centuries that followed, these early societies would grow into kingdoms and empires. Leaders would wage wars for power and territory. Monumental architecture would rise across the ancient world. Human civilization was entering a new and dramatic era. The age of the first great civilizations was about to begin. Chapter 3: The Rise of the First Civilizations. 3000 BCE to 2000 BCE. By 3000 BCE, human societies had changed dramatically from the small farming villages that had first appeared after the agricultural revolution. Across several fertile river valleys, communities had grown into large and organized cities. These cities became the centers of the world's first true civilizations. Civilization brought many new developments that would define human societies for thousands of years. Governments emerged to organize growing populations. Laws were created to maintain order. Writing systems allowed knowledge to be recorded and preserved. religion became a powerful force shaping the lives of entire communities. Among the earliest and most influential civilizations was the society that developed in the fertile lands between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. This region, known as Mesopotamia, gave birth to the remarkable culture of the Sumerian civilization. The Sumerians built some of the first cities in human history, including Uruk, Ur, and Lagash. These cities were surrounded by walls and filled with homes, markets, temples, and workshops. At the center of each city stood a towering structure known as a ziggurat, a massive temple dedicated to the city's patron god. Religion played a central role in Sumerian life. The Sumerians believed their world was controlled by powerful gods who governed natural forces such as storms, rivers, and the fertility of the land. Priests acted as intermediaries between the people and these divine powers, performing rituals and ceremonies meant to secure the favor of the gods. But Sumerian civilization was not defined by religion alone. The Sumerians were also pioneers of many technological and cultural innovations that shaped later societies. One of their most important achievements was the invention of writing. Around 3200 BCE, Sumerian scribes began pressing wedge-shaped symbols into wet clay tablets using a stylus made from reed. This writing system, known today as cuneiform, allowed information to be recorded and stored. At first, writing was used mainly for practical purposes. Merchants used it to track goods and trade transactions. Officials used it to record taxes and manage resources. Over time, writing expanded to include literature, historical records, and legal documents. Through writing, the knowledge of one generation could now survive long after its creators were gone. The Sumerians also made important advancements in science and technology. They developed early systems of mathematics that included the concept of measuring time in units based on 60. Even today, modern systems of time still reflect this ancient innovation, with 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour. Another remarkable invention attributed to the Sumerians was the wheel. Initially used for pottery making, the wheel was eventually adapted for transportation, allowing carts to carry goods more efficiently across land. While Mesopotamia flourished, another powerful civilization was rising along the banks of a great river to the southwest. This was the civilization of ancient Egypt. Unlike the unpredictable rivers of Mesopotamia, the Nile River followed a regular and dependable pattern. Each year, seasonal floods spread nutrient-rich soil across the surrounding farmland. This predictable cycle made agriculture in Egypt highly productive. Because of this stability, Egyptian civilization developed with remarkable continuity. At the center of Egyptian society stood the pharaoh, a ruler believed to be both a king and a divine figure. The pharaoh was seen as the representative of the gods on earth and was responsible for maintaining order and harmony in the kingdom. Egyptian society was highly organized, with a structured hierarchy that included priests, scribes, soldiers, craftsmen, farmers, and laborers. Each group played a role in supporting the prosperity of the kingdom. One of the most impressive achievements of ancient Egypt was its monumental architecture. The Egyptians built enormous structures that demonstrated both their engineering skill and their religious devotion. Among the most famous of these structures were the pyramids, particularly the massive pyramids constructed during the Old Kingdom period. The most iconic of these monuments is the Great Pyramid of Giza, built as a tomb for the pharaoh Khufu. Constructed from millions of stone blocks, the pyramid stood as a symbol of the pharaoh's power and his journey into the afterlife. Even thousands of years later, these structures remain among the most impressive feats of ancient engineering. Far to the east, along the Indus River and its tributaries, another extraordinary civilization was developing. This society, known today as the Indus Valley Civilization, created some of the most advanced cities of the ancient world. Cities such as Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro were carefully planned with straight streets arranged in grid patterns. Houses were built with standardized bricks, and many homes contained private wells and drainage systems. The Indus Valley people developed sophisticated sanitation systems that allowed wastewater to flow through covered drains beneath the streets. This level of urban planning was remarkably advanced for its time. Despite these achievements, many aspects of Indus Valley society remain mysterious. Their writing system has not yet been fully deciphered, leaving historians uncertain about many details of their culture and governance. Meanwhile, in East Asia, early societies along the Yellow River were also developing agricultural communities that would eventually lead to the rise of powerful Chinese dynasties. Although these civilizations were separated by great distances, they shared several important characteristics. Each developed agriculture based on fertile river valleys. Each formed cities with organized governments. Each created systems of writing and complex religious traditions. These similarities reveal something profound about human civilization. When human populations reach certain levels of complexity and stability, similar forms of social organization tend to emerge. Governments form to manage resources and maintain order. Religions develop to explain the mysteries of the world. Writing systems appear to record knowledge and preserve cultural traditions. As these early civilizations grew stronger, they also began interacting with one another through trade and cultural exchange. Goods such as metals, textiles, pottery, and precious stones traveled across expanding trade routes. With trade came new ideas, technologies, and beliefs. However, civilization also brought new challenges. Competition for land and resources sometimes led to conflict between neighboring cities and regions. Warfare gradually became a common feature of the ancient world as leaders sought to expand their power and influence. These conflicts would eventually lead to the rise of something even larger than city-states. They would lead to the creation of the first great empires. Powerful rulers would unite multiple cities and territories under single governments, controlling vast lands and millions of people. The age of kings and empires was approaching. Chapter 4: The First Empires in the Age of Bronze, 2000 BCE to 1200 BCE. By 2000 BCE, human civilization had entered a new phase. The early cities that had emerged in river valleys were no longer isolated communities struggling for survival. They had grown into powerful centers of culture, trade, and political authority. Populations were larger than ever before, and societies had become increasingly complex. But with this growth came competition. Cities fought over land, water, trade routes, and resources. In this environment of rivalry and ambition, powerful leaders began to realize that controlling a single city was not enough. True power lay in controlling many cities at once. This realization led to the rise of the world's first empires. One of the earliest and most influential of these empires emerged in Mesopotamia, under the leadership of a remarkable ruler named Sargon of Akkad. Around 2334 BCE to 2279 BCE, Sargon united numerous Sumerian city-states under a single government, creating the powerful Akkadian Empire. This achievement marked a major turning point in human history. For the first time, vast territories containing multiple cities, cultures, and populations were ruled by a single authority. Sargon built a professional army that allowed him to conquer rival cities and maintain control over distant lands. He also created systems of administration to govern his expanding empire. Officials were appointed to oversee different regions, ensuring that taxes were collected and laws were enforced. Although the Akkadian Empire eventually declined, it demonstrated a powerful idea that would shape future civilizations. Large empires could control immense territories and unify diverse peoples under one political system. In the centuries that followed, other civilizations would adopt similar strategies. Meanwhile, the technology of the time was also transforming societies. During this era, a new material became increasingly important. That material was bronze. Bronze was created by combining copper with tin, producing a metal that was stronger and more durable than copper alone. Bronze tools and weapons allowed craftsmen and warriors to achieve levels of efficiency and power that had previously been impossible. This period of history became known as the Bronze Age. Bronze weapons changed the nature of warfare. Armies equipped with bronze swords, spears, and armor were more effective in battle than those using older stone tools. As a result, military strength became a crucial factor in determining which kingdoms would rise and which would fall. Across the ancient world, powerful civilizations emerged during the Bronze Age. In Mesopotamia, the city of Babylon rose to prominence under the rule of one of history's most famous lawgivers, Hammurabi. During his reign from 1792 BCE to 1750 BCE, Hammurabi expanded Babylon's influence and created one of the earliest known legal codes. The laws of Hammurabi were carefully inscribed on a tall stone monument so that all citizens could see them. This code established rules governing many aspects of daily life, including trade, property, family relationships, and criminal justice. The idea that laws should be written down and applied consistently was an important step in the development of organized government. Far to the west, another powerful civilization was flourishing along the Nile River. In ancient Egypt, the period known as the Middle Kingdom and later the New Kingdom saw the expansion of Egyptian influence across neighboring lands. Egyptian rulers commanded large armies and developed impressive technologies in architecture, agriculture, and engineering. Monumental temples and statues were constructed to honor both gods and pharaohs, reflecting the deep religious beliefs of Egyptian society. Trade networks connected Egypt to distant regions, bringing valuable goods such as gold, incense, and exotic animals into the kingdom. Meanwhile, in the eastern Mediterranean, another remarkable civilization was developing on the island of Crete. This society is known today as the Minoan civilization. The Minoans were skilled sailors and traders who built powerful maritime networks across the Mediterranean Sea. Their cities featured elaborate palaces decorated with colorful frescoes that depicted scenes of nature, ceremonies, and athletic activities. Unlike many other ancient societies, the Minoans appear to have focused more on trade and cultural development than on warfare. Their influence spread across many nearby islands and coastal regions. On the Greek mainland, the Mycenaean civilization rose to prominence during this same period. The Mycenaeans were skilled warriors who built fortified cities surrounded by massive stone walls. Their society was organized around powerful kings and aristocratic elites who controlled land and resources. The Mycenaeans maintained strong trade connections with other Mediterranean cultures and played an important role in the exchange of goods and ideas across the region. Further east, the Hittite civilization emerged in Anatolia, in what is now modern-day Turkey. The Hittites became known for their advanced military technology and their mastery of ironworking techniques that would later transform warfare. The Hittites built powerful chariot armies and competed for dominance with neighboring empires, including Egypt. These various civilizations were connected through an expanding network of trade routes. Ships carried goods across the Mediterranean Sea, while caravans transported materials across deserts and mountains. Metals, textiles, pottery, spices, and luxury items traveled between distant lands. Along with these goods came new ideas, technologies, and cultural influences. For the first time in human history, Civilizations separated by thousands of kilometers were interacting regularly. However, the Bronze Age world was also fragile. The complex networks that connected these civilizations depended on stable trade routes, reliable governments, and functioning economies. When these systems were disrupted, the effects could spread rapidly across entire regions. Around 1200 BCE, a series of mysterious events triggered a widespread collapse across the eastern Mediterranean and Near East. Many major civilizations of the Bronze Age experienced sudden decline or destruction. Cities were abandoned, trade networks collapsed, powerful kingdoms disappeared. Historians still debate the causes of this dramatic upheaval. Some evidence suggests that invasions by migrating groups, often referred to as the Sea Peoples, may have contributed to the destruction of several coastal cities. Other factors may have included climate changes, internal rebellions, and economic instability. Whatever the precise causes, the result was clear. The Bronze Age world, which had flourished for centuries, entered a period of crisis and transformation. But history rarely stops moving forward. Out of the chaos of this collapse, new civilizations and powerful kingdoms would eventually rise. These societies would shape the next great chapter in the story of humanity. The age of classical civilizations was approaching, bringing with it philosophers, conquerors, and ideas that would echo across the centuries. Chapter 5: The Rise of Classical Civilizations, 1200 BCE to 500 BCE. Around 1200 BCE, much of the ancient world experienced a dramatic period of upheaval. The powerful kingdoms and trade networks that had dominated the Bronze Age collapsed across large regions of the eastern Mediterranean and the Near East. Cities were abandoned, populations declined, and long-distance trade routes were disrupted. For a time, it seemed as if the progress of civilization itself had faltered. But history rarely moves in a straight line. Periods of collapse are often followed by renewal, and from the ruins of the Bronze Age world, new societies began to rise. This period marked the beginning of what historians often describe as the Age of Classical Civilizations. Across different parts of the world, powerful states and influential cultures began shaping ideas, institutions, and traditions that would influence humanity for thousands of years. One of the most important developments during this time occurred in the Eastern Mediterranean, with the emergence of the civilization known as Ancient Greece. After the collapse of the earlier Mycenaean world, Greek society entered a period often referred to as a Dark Age. Many cities declined, writing disappeared for a time, and populations were reduced. Yet slowly, Greek communities began rebuilding. By around 800 BCE, new city-states had emerged across the Greek mainland and surrounding islands. These city-states, known as polis, were independent political communities that governed themselves. Among the most influential were Athens, Sparta, and Corinth. Each city-state developed its own political structure, social traditions, and military organization. Athens would eventually become famous for developing one of the earliest systems of democracy. In this system, male citizens were allowed to participate in political decision-making, debating laws and policies within public assemblies. Although this democracy was limited compared to modern standards, it represented a revolutionary idea. For the first time in history, ordinary citizens played a direct role in governing their society. Sparta, on the other hand, followed a very different path. Spartan society focused almost entirely on military discipline and strength. From a young age, Spartan boys were trained to become soldiers, preparing them to defend their city and maintain control over conquered territories. Despite their differences, these Greek city-states shared a common language, religious traditions, and cultural identity. Greek culture flourished during this period. Poets such as Homer composed epic stories that celebrated heroic adventures and the struggles of legendary warriors. These stories, including the Iliad and the Odyssey, became foundational works of Western literature. Philosophy also began emerging as an important intellectual tradition. Thinkers sought to understand the nature of the universe, human behavior, and the meaning of life through reason and observation. Meanwhile, to the east, another powerful empire was rising. In the lands that once belonged to earlier Mesopotamian kingdoms, a vast and influential state known as the Achaemenid Persian Empire emerged. Founded by the ambitious ruler Cyrus the Great around 550 BCE, this empire would become one of the largest political entities the world had ever seen. The Persian Empire stretched from the eastern Mediterranean across the Middle East and deep into Central Asia. Governing such a vast territory required innovative administrative systems. Persian rulers divided their empire into provinces known as satrapies. Each satrapy was governed by an official who oversaw local affairs while remaining loyal to the central authority of the king. To maintain communication across this enormous empire, the Persians constructed extensive road networks. One of the most famous of these routes was the Royal Road, which allowed messengers and travelers to move rapidly between distant regions. The Persian Empire was also notable for its relatively tolerant approach toward the diverse cultures it governed. Conquered peoples were often allowed to maintain their own traditions, languages, and religions as long as they remained loyal to the empire and paid their taxes. This approach helped maintain stability across vast and culturally diverse territories. Far to the east, another ancient civilization was experiencing profound political and intellectual transformation. In the lands surrounding the Yellow River, early Chinese states were evolving into more organized political systems. During this time, the influence of the Zhou dynasty shaped Chinese civilization for centuries. The Zhou rulers introduced the concept known as the Mandate of Heaven. According to this belief, a ruler governed with divine approval, but only as long as they ruled wisely and justly. If a ruler became corrupt or ineffective, it was believed that heaven would withdraw its mandate, allowing a new leader to take power. This idea would play a crucial role in Chinese political philosophy for thousands of years. During this same era, China also witnessed the emergence of some of the most influential thinkers in human history. Among them was Confucius, whose teachings emphasized morality, social harmony, and respect for tradition. Confucius believed that a well-ordered society depended on ethical leadership and responsible behavior within families and communities. His ideas would shape Chinese culture and governance for more than 2 millennia. While these developments were unfolding in Asia and the Mediterranean, powerful kingdoms continued to thrive along the Nile River. The civilization of ancient Egypt remained a center of cultural and religious tradition. Egyptian rulers constructed magnificent temples and monuments, while maintaining complex systems of administration and agriculture that supported large populations. Across these regions, the classical world was gradually taking shape. Trade networks connected distant societies, allowing goods and ideas to travel across continents. Technologies such as iron tools and improved agricultural methods increased productivity and supported growing populations. Cities expanded into centers of learning, politics, and commerce. By 500 BCE, the foundations of several major civilizations had been firmly established. In Greece, city-states were developing systems of governance and philosophy that would influence Western culture for centuries. In Persia, a vast empire united diverse peoples across enormous territories. In China, philosophical traditions and political ideas were shaping one of the world's oldest continuous civilizations. Human civilization, was becoming increasingly interconnected and sophisticated. But an even more dramatic transformation was approaching. In the centuries ahead, ambitious leaders and powerful armies would reshape the political map of the ancient world. Empires would rise to unprecedented heights of power, spreading their influence across vast territories. Among these leaders would be one young king, whose conquests would forever change the course of history. The Age of Great Conquerors was about to begin. Chapter 6: The Age of Great Conquerors, 500 BCE to 200 BCE. By 500 BCE, several powerful civilizations had already taken shape across the ancient world. Great cities flourished along fertile rivers, trade routes connected distant lands, and philosophical ideas were beginning to shape how societies understood themselves. Yet this era would soon become defined not only by culture and philosophy, but also by conquest. Ambitious rulers and powerful armies began expanding their territories, creating empires larger than anything the world had previously seen. These conquests would connect distant civilizations, spread ideas across continents, and dramatically reshape the course of human history. One of the most powerful states during this time was the vast Achaemenid Persian Empire. By the early 500s BCE, this empire controlled enormous territories stretching from the eastern Mediterranean through the Middle East and into Central Asia. The Persian kings ruled over a diverse population of peoples, languages, and cultures. Their ability to manage such a large empire required efficient administration and strong military forces. Despite their strength, the Persian Empire soon faced resistance from a collection of smaller but determined societies in the eastern Mediterranean. These societies were the independent city-states of ancient Greece. The Greeks valued their independence and were unwilling to accept Persian rule. This tension eventually led to a series of conflicts known as the Greco-Persian Wars. During these wars, several famous battles took place that would become legendary in history. One of the most well-known was the Battle of Thermopylae in 480 BCE, where a small Greek force led by Spartan warriors attempted to block the advance of a massive Persian army. Although the Spartans were ultimately defeated, their resistance became a powerful symbol of courage and determination. Another important moment came with the Greek naval victory at the Battle of Salamis. Greek ships successfully defeated a much larger Persian fleet, helping to turn the tide of the war. Eventually, the Greek city-states managed to repel Persian invasions and preserve their independence. The victory of the Greeks allowed their culture and intellectual traditions to flourish. Cities such as Athens entered what is often called a golden age. During this period, remarkable achievements occurred in art, architecture, philosophy, and science. Thinkers such as Socrates encouraged people to question assumptions and pursue knowledge through reason and dialogue. His ideas would influence later philosophers including Plato and Aristotle, shaping the development of Western philosophy for centuries. But even as Greek culture thrived, the political unity of the Greek city-states remained fragile. Rivalries and internal conflicts weakened their ability to cooperate. This weakness created an opportunity for a rising power to the north. In the Kingdom of Macedonia, a determined and ambitious ruler named Philip II of Macedon began reorganizing his army and expanding his influence. Through a combination of diplomacy and military strength, Philip gradually brought many Greek city-states under his control. However, Philip would not live to see the full realization of his ambitions. After his death, power passed to his young son, a leader whose name would become legendary throughout history. This young ruler was Alexander the Great. Ascending to the throne in 336 BCE, Alexander inherited both his father's powerful army and his vision of expansion. But Alexander possessed an even greater ambition. He did not merely wish to dominate Greece. He intended to conquer the entire Persian Empire. In 334 BCE, Alexander launched his campaign into Persian territory. Over the next decade, his army marched thousands of kilometers across Asia, defeating Persian forces in a series of decisive battles. One of the most significant of these battles occurred at the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BCE. In this confrontation, Alexander's army faced the massive forces of the Persian king Darius III. Despite being outnumbered, Alexander's tactical brilliance allowed his forces to achieve a decisive victory. This battle effectively ended Persian control over much of their empire. Alexander continued his campaigns across vast regions, conquering Egypt, Persia, and territories extending into Central Asia and the Indian subcontinent. Along the way, he founded numerous cities, many of which were named Alexandria. These cities served as centers of Greek culture and administration across his newly conquered lands. Alexander's conquests created one of the largest empires the world had ever seen. His campaigns also spread Greek language, art, and philosophy across much of the known world. This cultural blending between Greek traditions and local cultures became known as the Hellenistic world. However, Alexander's empire was short-lived. In 323 BCE, at the age of only 32, Alexander died unexpectedly in the city of Babylon. Without a clear successor, his vast empire quickly fragmented into several competing kingdoms ruled by his former generals. Although his empire did not last long as a unified state, Alexander's influence remained profound. The cultural exchange that followed his conquests connected civilizations from the Mediterranean to South Asia. Meanwhile, in the Western Mediterranean, another power was gradually rising. On the Italian peninsula, a small city along the Tiber River had begun expanding its influence over neighboring territories. This city was Rome. Although still relatively modest compared to the great empires of the East, Rome possessed qualities that would eventually allow it to dominate the Mediterranean world. Its disciplined armies, strong political institutions, and ability to incorporate conquered peoples into its system would help it grow steadily stronger. The stage was being set for a new power to rise. The next era of history would see the expansion of Rome and the transformation of the Mediterranean world into the center of one of the most powerful empires in human history. The story of civilization was about to enter the age of Rome. Chapter 7: The Rise of Rome in the Classical World. 200 BCE to 200 CE. By 200 BCE, the ancient world had been shaped by centuries of conquest, trade, and cultural exchange. The empires of earlier eras had risen and fallen, and powerful civilizations had left their marks across vast regions. Yet during this time, a new power was rising in the Western Mediterranean that would eventually dominate much of the known world. This power began as a modest city along the banks of the Tiber River. That city was ancient Rome. Rome's early history was shaped by conflict and resilience. For centuries, the city struggled against neighboring tribes and rival kingdoms in Italy. Through a combination of military discipline, strategic alliances, and political adaptability, the Romans gradually expanded their influence across the Italian peninsula. Unlike many other societies of the ancient world, Rome developed a political system known as a republic. Instead of being ruled by a single king, the Roman Republic was governed by elected officials and a powerful assembly known as the Senate. This system allowed different segments of Roman society to participate in government, though power was largely controlled by wealthy aristocratic families. The Roman Republic also created one of the most disciplined military systems of the ancient world. Roman soldiers were organized into legions, highly trained units capable of fighting in coordinated formations. These legions were supported by strict discipline, standardized equipment, and advanced military engineering. As Rome grew stronger, its ambitions expanded beyond Italy. Across the Mediterranean Sea, another powerful civilization dominated trade and naval power. This was the wealthy maritime city of Carthaginian civilization, centered in North Africa. Competition between Rome and Carthage eventually led to a series of devastating conflicts known as the Punic Wars. These wars lasted from 264 BCE to 146 BCE and would determine which power would dominate the Western Mediterranean. One of the most famous figures of this conflict was the brilliant Carthaginian commander Hannibal. During the Second Punic War, Hannibal led one of the most daring military campaigns in history. He marched his army from Spain across the towering Alps and into Italy, bringing war directly to Roman territory. For years, Hannibal defeated Roman armies in a series of stunning battles, including the devastating Roman defeat at the Battle of Cannae in 216 BCE. Despite these victories, Hannibal was unable to force Rome into surrender. Rome's strength lay not only in its armies, but also in its resilience. Even after suffering enormous losses, the Roman Republic continued raising new armies and fighting back. Eventually, Roman forces carried the war to North Africa itself. In 146 BCE, Rome destroyed the city of Carthage and ended its rival's power permanently. With Carthage defeated, Rome became the dominant power in the Mediterranean world. Over the next century, Roman territories expanded rapidly. Roman armies conquered Greece, parts of North Africa, and large portions of the Middle East. The Mediterranean Sea gradually became known as Mare Nostrum, meaning our sea, reflecting Rome's control over its surrounding lands. But Rome's rapid expansion also created new challenges. The wealth gained through conquest created enormous economic inequality. Powerful generals commanded loyal armies, and political rivalries within Rome grew increasingly intense. These tensions eventually pushed the Roman Republic toward crisis. One of the most influential figures during this turbulent time was the ambitious general Julius Caesar. Caesar gained fame and power through his military campaigns, particularly his conquest of Gaul, a vast region that includes much of modern France. His victories made him immensely popular among Roman soldiers and citizens. However, Caesar's growing influence alarmed many members of the Roman Senate. In 49 BCE, Caesar made a bold and controversial decision. He crossed the Rubicon River with his army, an act that effectively declared civil war against the Roman Republic. After defeating his rivals, Caesar became the dominant ruler of Rome. Yet his power would not last long. In 44 BCE, fearing that Caesar intended to make himself king, a group of senators assassinated him inside the Roman Senate. Their hope was to restore the Roman Republic. Instead, the assassination plunged Rome into further chaos. Years of civil war followed as rival factions struggled for control. Eventually, a new leader emerged victorious from this conflict. This leader was Augustus. In 27 BCE, Augustus established a new political system that marked the end of the Roman Republic and the beginning of the Roman Empire. Although Augustus maintained the appearance of republican institutions, he held ultimate authority over the state. Under his leadership, Rome entered a period of stability and prosperity known as the Pax Romana, or Roman peace. During this era, which lasted roughly from 27 BCE to 180 CE, the Roman Empire reached extraordinary heights of power and influence. Roman engineers constructed vast networks of roads that connected cities across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. These roads allowed armies, merchants, and travelers to move efficiently throughout the empire. Roman architecture also flourished. Monumental buildings such as temples, amphitheaters, and aqueducts transformed the landscapes of Roman cities. Trade expanded dramatically as goods moved across the empire and beyond. Spices from India, silk from China, and precious metals from distant regions all found their way into Roman markets. Meanwhile, Roman law developed into a sophisticated legal system that influenced many later civilizations. Culturally, the Roman world absorbed ideas from earlier Greek traditions. Greek philosophy, literature, and art became deeply integrated into Roman culture. By 200 CE, the Roman Empire stretched from Britain in the north to Egypt in the south, and from Spain in the west to the Middle East in the east. It had become one of the most powerful and influential empires in human history. Yet even as Rome stood at the height of its power, the seeds of future challenges were beginning to emerge. Political instability, economic pressures, and external threats would eventually test the strength of the empire. The story of Rome was far from over. In the centuries ahead, the ancient world would face dramatic transformation that would reshape the course of civilization once again. Chapter 8: Faith, Empires, and the Transformation of the Ancient World. 200 CE to 700 CE. By the beginning of the 3rd century, the ancient world stood at a turning point. The great classical empires that had dominated earlier centuries were beginning to face pressures they had never experienced before. Trade networks were shifting, populations were moving across continents, new belief systems were spreading among ordinary people and rulers alike. These changes would gradually transform the political and cultural foundations of human civilization. At the center of this transformation stood the vast and powerful Roman Empire. For nearly 2 centuries, Rome had experienced the stability of the Pax Romana. Its borders were guarded by powerful legions, its cities thrived with commerce, and its roads connected territories across thousands of kilometers. But after 200 CE, the empire entered a period historians call the crisis of the 3rd century. During this time, Rome faced a series of devastating challenges. Emperors rose and fell in rapid succession, often overthrown by rival generals. Civil wars erupted as different factions struggled for control of the imperial throne. At the same time, economic problems spread across the empire. Trade declined, inflation weakened the currency, and many cities began to shrink. Beyond Rome's borders, powerful enemies were also growing stronger. In the east, a new Persian power had emerged known as the Sasanian Empire. The Sasanian rulers revived many traditions of ancient Persian rule and built a centralized state capable of rivaling Rome itself. For centuries, these two great empires would compete for control over the Middle East. Meanwhile, along Rome's northern frontiers, waves of migrating peoples began pressing against imperial borders. These groups included the Goths, Vandals, and other Germanic tribes seeking new lands and opportunities. These migrations would eventually play a crucial role in reshaping Europe. Despite these challenges, Rome was not destined to collapse immediately. In the late 3rd century, a powerful emperor named Diocletian attempted to stabilize the empire through major reforms. Diocletian reorganized the government, strengthened the army, and divided the empire into administrative regions to improve control. Yet one of the most significant transformations during this era came not from political reform, but from religion. For centuries, the Roman Empire had been home to many religious traditions. Citizens worshipped a wide variety of gods drawn from Roman, Greek, Egyptian, and local cultures. But a new faith was quietly spreading across the empire. This faith was Christianity. Christianity began in the eastern provinces of the Roman Empire during the 1st century CE. It was based on the teachings of Jesus Christ, a Jewish preacher whose message emphasized compassion, forgiveness, and spiritual salvation. At first, Christians were a small minority within the empire. Some Roman authorities viewed them with suspicion, and periods of persecution occurred. Yet the religion continued to spread steadily among different social classes. A major turning point came during the reign of the Emperor Constantine the Great. In 313 CE, Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, which granted religious tolerance to Christians and allowed them to practice their faith openly. Over the following decades, Christianity grew rapidly in influence. By the end of the 4th century, it had become the official religion of the Roman Empire. This transformation would have profound effects on the culture and politics of Europe and the Mediterranean world for centuries to come. But even as Christianity spread, the political unity of Rome was weakening. In 330 CE, Constantine founded a new imperial capital in the eastern Mediterranean city of Constantinople. Strategically located between Europe and Asia, Constantinople quickly became one of the most important cities in the world. Over time, the eastern half of the empire grew stronger and more prosperous than the western regions. Meanwhile, the Western Roman territories continued to struggle with economic decline and repeated invasions. Germanic groups gradually settled inside imperial borders, sometimes as allies and sometimes as conquerors. The turning point came in 476 CE, when a Germanic leader named Odoacer deposed the last Roman emperor in the West. Historians often mark this event as the fall of the Western Roman Empire. Yet the eastern half of the empire survived. Centered in Constantinople, this state continued Roman traditions for nearly 1,000 more years. Today it is known as the Byzantine Empire. While Europe entered a period of political fragmentation, other regions of the world were experiencing their own major transformations. In the 6th century, the Byzantine Emperor Justinian I attempted to restore the glory of the old Roman Empire. His armies reconquered parts of Italy and North Africa, and his government compiled one of the most influential legal systems in history known as the Corpus Juris Civilis, or the body of civil law. Justinian also oversaw the construction of magnificent architecture, including the famous cathedral known as Hagia Sophia in Constantinople. Yet even as the Byzantine Empire flourished, a powerful new civilization was beginning to rise in the deserts of Arabia. In the early 7th century, a merchant from the city of Mecca began preaching a message of religious reform and spiritual unity. This man was Muhammad. Muhammad's teachings formed the foundation of Islam. After Muhammad's death in 632 CE, Islamic leaders known as caliphs began expanding their influence across the Middle East and beyond. Within only a few decades, Muslim armies had conquered vast territories that once belonged to the Byzantine and Persian empires. By 700 CE, the early Islamic State had grown into one of the largest empires the world had ever seen. The spread of Islam connected regions stretching from Spain to Central Asia through shared language, religion, and trade. This new civilization would soon become a center of scholarship, science, and cultural exchange. As the ancient classical world faded, a new era of global history was beginning. The rise of new religions, new empires, and new cultural networks would reshape societies across Europe, Asia, and Africa. And from these changes, the foundations of the medieval world would emerge. Chapter 9: The Medieval World and the Rise of New Powers. 700 CE to 1200 CE. By the beginning of the 8th century, the world had entered a new historical era. The great classical empires that once dominated the Mediterranean and the Middle East had either transformed or disappeared. In their place, new civilizations and political systems began shaping the course of history. This period is often known as the medieval era, a time marked by shifting empires, expanding religions, and the development of powerful regional kingdoms. One of the most dynamic forces of this age was the rapid expansion of the Islamic world. After the death of Muhammad in 632 CE, leadership of the Muslim community passed to a series of rulers known as caliphs. Under their command, Muslim armies expanded across vast regions of the Middle East, North Africa, and Central Asia. Within a few generations, the Islamic State had grown into one of the largest empires in history. By the 8th century, this expanding civilization was governed by the powerful Umayyad Caliphate. From its capital in Damascus, the Umayyad rulers controlled territories stretching from Spain in the west to the borders of India in the east. This enormous empire connected many cultures and regions through trade routes that crossed deserts, seas, and mountains. In 750 CE, a major political shift occurred when the Umayyad dynasty was overthrown and replaced by the Abbasid Caliphate. The Abbasid rulers moved the capital eastward to the newly founded city of Baghdad, which quickly became one of the greatest intellectual centers of the medieval world. During the following centuries, scholars in the Islamic world preserved and expanded knowledge from earlier civilizations. Greek philosophy, Persian science, and Indian mathematics were studied and translated. This period is often referred to as the Islamic Golden Age. Mathematicians developed new numerical systems that later spread into Europe. Physicians wrote detailed medical texts that influenced healthcare for generations. Astronomers mapped the movements of stars and planets with remarkable precision. Trade also flourished across the Islamic world. Merchants connected markets from the Mediterranean Sea to the Indian Ocean and beyond. Through these networks, ideas, technologies, and cultural traditions traveled across continents. While Islamic civilization was flourishing in the Middle East, Europe was undergoing its own transformation. After the collapse of the Western Roman Empire in 476 CE, much of Western Europe had fragmented into smaller kingdoms ruled by Germanic leaders. Over time, these kingdoms began forming new political structures. One of the most influential rulers of early medieval Europe was Charlemagne. Charlemagne became king of the Franks in 768 CE and spent decades expanding his kingdom through military campaigns. His empire eventually covered large portions of modern France, Germany, and northern Italy. In the year 800 CE, Charlemagne was crowned emperor by the Pope in Rome. This event symbolized the revival of imperial authority in Western Europe and strengthened the alliance between political rulers and the Christian Church. Charlemagne's reign also encouraged education and cultural revival. Monasteries and churches became centers of learning where scholars copied ancient manuscripts and preserved classical knowledge. Although Charlemagne's empire did not remain united after his death, it laid the foundation for many future European states. Meanwhile, in Eastern Europe and the Eastern Mediterranean, the Byzantine Empire continued to serve as a bridge between the ancient and medieval worlds. Centered in the great city of Constantinople, the Byzantine Empire preserved Roman law, Greek scholarship, and Christian traditions. Despite facing constant threats from neighboring powers, the Byzantine state remained one of the most sophisticated civilizations of the medieval era. Further east, powerful developments were also unfolding in Asia. In China, the rise of the Tang dynasty marked one of the most prosperous periods in Chinese history. From 618 CE to 907 CE, the Tang rulers expanded China's influence across East Asia. Their capital city, Chang'an, became one of the largest and most cosmopolitan cities in the world. Foreign merchants, diplomats, and travelers arrived from distant lands, creating a vibrant center of international trade and culture. Chinese inventions and technologies also advanced during this era. Improvements in printing, agriculture, and engineering strengthened the empire and increased population growth. Later, the Song dynasty continued many of these developments. The Song period witnessed major economic expansion and technological innovation. The use of paper money, improvements in navigation, and the growth of large cities demonstrated the sophistication of Chinese society. Trade between Asia, the Middle East, and Europe expanded along routes collectively known as the Silk Road. These trade routes were not a single road, but a network of pathways connecting distant civilizations. Merchants transported silk, spices, precious metals, and luxury goods across deserts and mountains. But the Silk Road also carried something even more powerful than trade goods. It carried ideas. Religions such as Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam spread along these networks. Scientific knowledge and cultural traditions moved between civilizations, shaping societies in new ways. By the year 1200 CE, the medieval world had become a vast interconnected system of empires, kingdoms, and trade networks. Yet new forces were already rising beyond the horizons of established civilizations. From the grasslands of Central Asia, a powerful group of nomadic warriors was beginning to unite under a leader whose conquests would soon shake the foundations of the known world. That leader was Genghis Khan, and the empire he would create would soon become the largest contiguous land empire in human history. The next chapter of civilization was about to begin. Chapter 10: Conquest, Trade, and the Reshaping of the Medieval World. 1200 CE to 1450 CE. At the beginning of the 13th century, vast regions of the world were connected through trade networks, powerful kingdoms, and expanding religions. Yet many of these civilizations had developed in relative isolation from one another. That situation was about to change dramatically. From the vast grasslands of Central Asia emerged a force that would unite enormous territories under a single political authority. At the center of this transformation was a man born into a nomadic tribe around 1162. His name was Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan rose from a difficult childhood marked by hardship and tribal conflict. Through determination, military skill, and strategic alliances, he gradually united the rival nomadic tribes of the Mongolian steppe. In 1206, he was proclaimed the supreme leader of the Mongols. From that moment forward, the expansion of the Mongol Empire began. The Mongol armies were unlike most military forces of the time. They were highly mobile, traveling vast distances on horseback and using sophisticated battlefield tactics. Their communication systems and strict discipline allowed them to coordinate attacks across enormous territories. Within a few decades, Mongol forces swept across Central Asia, northern China, and the Middle East. Cities that resisted often faced devastating destruction, while those that surrendered were sometimes spared and integrated into the expanding empire. After the death of Genghis Khan in 1227, his descendants continued the campaigns of conquest. By the mid-13th century, the Mongol Empire stretched from the Pacific Ocean in the east to Eastern Europe in the west. It became the largest continuous land empire in human history. Although the Mongol conquests were often violent, they also created an unexpected period of stability across Eurasia. Historians sometimes refer to this era as the Pax Mongolica. Under Mongol rule, trade routes across Asia became safer for merchants and travelers. Goods, technologies, and ideas flowed more freely between distant civilizations. One of the most famous travelers of this era was the Venetian merchant Marco Polo. In the late 13th century, Marco Polo journeyed across Asia and spent many years in the court of the Mongol ruler Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan and the founder of the Yuan dynasty in China. Marco Polo later described the wealth and sophistication of East Asian societies to audiences in Europe, inspiring curiosity about distant lands. Yet the Mongol Empire did not remain united forever. Over time, it divided into several regional states ruled by different branches of the Mongol royal family. These included the Golden Horde in Eastern Europe, the Ilkhanate in Persia, and the Yuan dynasty in China. Even after political unity weakened, the networks created during Mongol rule continued to shape global trade and communication. Meanwhile, other regions of the world were also experiencing major developments. In Europe, medieval society had gradually evolved into a system often described as feudalism. Land was controlled by nobles who governed territories in exchange for military loyalty to kings. The Christian Church played a powerful role in shaping social and political life. Religious institutions owned vast lands, influenced rulers, and served as centers of education. During this era, a series of religious conflicts known as the Crusades took place between Christian and Muslim forces. Beginning in 1096 and continuing for nearly 2 centuries, these campaigns were launched by European rulers attempting to capture holy sites in the Middle East. Although the Crusades ultimately failed to establish long-lasting Christian control over the region, they increased contact between Europe and the Islamic world. Through these encounters, Europeans gained access to new knowledge, goods, and technologies. Further east, China continued to play a central role in global trade and innovation. Under Mongol rule during the Yuan dynasty, China remained one of the most economically advanced regions in the world. Later, the Ming dynasty rose to power in 1368 after overthrowing Mongol rule. The Ming rulers restored traditional Chinese governance and strengthened the economy through agricultural expansion and manufacturing. During the early 15th century, the Ming court sponsored remarkable naval expeditions led by the Admiral Zheng He. Between 1405 and 1433, Zheng He commanded enormous fleets that sailed across the Indian Ocean, visiting Southeast Asia, India, the Arabian Peninsula, and East Africa. These voyages demonstrated the technological sophistication and maritime capabilities of China at the time. Yet despite these impressive expeditions, Chinese rulers eventually chose to limit overseas exploration, focusing instead on internal stability. In Europe, however, curiosity about the wider world was growing. The combination of expanding trade networks, new navigational technologies, and increasing demand for luxury goods began encouraging European sailors to search for new sea routes to Asia. These efforts would soon lead to one of the most transformative periods in human history. By the middle of the 15th century, the medieval world was approaching its end. Old systems were weakening, new ideas were spreading, and the stage was being set for an age of exploration that would permanently connect the continents of the Earth. The next chapter of civilization would bring global encounters on a scale never seen before. Chapter 11: Exploration, Renaissance, and the Birth of the Modern World. 1450 CE to 1700 CA. By the middle of the 15th century, the world was entering a period of dramatic transformation. For centuries, civilizations had grown and developed within regional spheres of influence. Trade connected distant regions, but vast oceans and dangerous routes still separated much of humanity. That separation was about to end. Technological improvements in navigation, shipbuilding, and cartography began allowing sailors to travel farther across open seas. European kingdoms, eager to expand trade and wealth, started searching for new maritime routes to Asia. This effort would ignite what historians now call the Age of Exploration. One of the earliest pioneers of this movement was the Portuguese explorer Prince Henry the Navigator. Although he was not a sailor himself, Prince Henry sponsored numerous expeditions along the western coast of Africa during the early 15th century. These voyages gradually expanded European geographic knowledge and opened new trade routes. Portuguese sailors developed advanced ships called caravels, which were capable of traveling long distances and navigating difficult winds. By the late 15th century, these improvements made even greater voyages possible. In 1492, an Italian navigator sailing under the Spanish crown set out to reach Asia by sailing west across the Atlantic Ocean. His name was Christopher Columbus. Instead of reaching Asia, Columbus encountered lands previously unknown to Europeans. His voyage connected Europe with the Americas and began a new era of global interaction. In 1498, another Portuguese explorer named Vasco da Gama successfully sailed around the southern tip of Africa and reached India by sea. For the first time, a direct maritime trade route between Europe and Asia had been established. These voyages dramatically reshaped global trade networks. Soon afterward, the Portuguese explorer Ferdinand Magellan launched an expedition that achieved one of the most remarkable journeys in human history. Although Magellan himself did not survive the voyage, his crew completed the first circumnavigation of the Earth between 1519 and 1522. This expedition proved conclusively that the world could be traveled by sea in a continuous journey. Exploration also led to conquest. Spanish forces, driven by ambition and the search for wealth, began invading powerful civilizations in the Americas. One of the most famous conquistadors was Hernán Cortés. In 1519, Cortés led a small Spanish force into the heart of the powerful Aztec civilization in present-day Mexico. Despite being vastly outnumbered, the Spanish defeated the Aztec Empire through alliances with local rivals, superior weaponry, and the devastating impact of European diseases. A few years later, another Spanish conqueror named Francisco Pizarro invaded the powerful Inca civilization in South America. The fall of these great civilizations transformed the Americas and brought enormous wealth to European powers. Gold and silver from the New World flowed into Europe, fueling economic expansion and strengthening emerging empires. At the same time, Europe itself was undergoing a powerful cultural revival. This movement is known as the Renaissance. Beginning in the Italian city-states during the 14th century and expanding across Europe, the Renaissance marked a renewed interest in classical learning, art, and scientific inquiry. Artists, architects, and thinkers sought inspiration from the achievements of ancient Greece and Rome. Among the greatest artists of this era was Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo was not only a painter, but also an inventor, scientist, and engineer whose notebooks explored ideas centuries ahead of their time. Another towering figure of the Renaissance was Michelangelo, whose sculptures and paintings demonstrated extraordinary mastery of form and human expression. Meanwhile, intellectual thinkers such as Nicolaus Copernicus began questioning long-held assumptions about the universe. Copernicus proposed a revolutionary idea that the Earth was not the center of the cosmos, but instead orbited around the sun. This concept would later become a central element of the scientific revolution. Religion also experienced major upheaval during this period. In 1517, a German monk named Martin Luther publicly challenged the authority and practices of the Roman Catholic Church. His criticisms helped launch the Protestant Reformation. As new Protestant churches spread across Europe, religious unity fractured, and conflicts between Catholic and Protestant states reshaped European politics. Despite these divisions, new ideas continued spreading rapidly. One of the most important technological innovations of the time was the printing press, perfected by Johannes Gutenberg in the mid-15th century. Printed books allowed knowledge to spread faster than ever before, reaching scholars, merchants, and ordinary citizens. By the end of the 17th century, the world had become far more interconnected than at any previous point in history. Global trade routes linked Europe, Africa, Asia, and the Americas in a complex system of exchange. Ideas, goods, cultures, and people were moving across continents at unprecedented speeds. These transformations marked the birth of the modern global world. But the next phase of human civilization would bring even greater change. Scientific discovery, industrial innovation, and revolutionary political movements were about to reshape societies in ways that no previous generation had ever experienced. Chapter 12: Revolution, Industry, and the Transformation of Society. 1700 CE to 1900 CE. By the beginning of the 18th century, the world had already undergone enormous change. Global trade routes connected distant continents, powerful empires controlled vast territories, and new ideas were spreading through books and universities. Yet an even greater transformation was about to unfold. During the 18th and 19th centuries, human civilization experienced revolutions in politics, science, and industry that reshaped nearly every aspect of society. One of the earliest forces behind this transformation was an intellectual movement known as the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was driven by philosophers and thinkers who believed that reason, science, and human knowledge could improve society. They questioned traditional authority and argued that governments should serve the people rather than absolute rulers. Among the influential thinkers of this movement was John Locke, who argued that individuals possessed natural rights such as life, liberty, and property. Another important philosopher, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, believed that political power should come from the collective will of the people. These ideas gradually inspired political movements that challenged existing monarchies. One of the first major events influenced by Enlightenment thinking occurred in North America. In 1775, tensions between British authorities and 13 colonies erupted into the American Revolutionary War. Colonists argued that they should not be taxed without representation in the British government. After years of conflict, the colonies declared independence in 1776 and eventually formed a new nation known as the United States. The success of this revolution demonstrated that a colonial population could overthrow imperial rule and establish a government based on constitutional principles. Not long afterward, another revolution shook Europe itself. In 1789, widespread economic hardship and political inequality triggered the French Revolution. Crowds in Paris demanded the end of absolute monarchy and the creation of a political system based on equality and citizenship. The revolution dramatically transformed France. The monarchy was overthrown, the king was executed, and a republic was declared. However, years of political instability followed. Eventually, a talented military commander named Napoleon Bonaparte rose to power. Napoleon crowned himself emperor in 1804 and launched a series of military campaigns across Europe. His armies reshaped political boundaries and spread revolutionary ideas about law and citizenship throughout the continent. Yet after years of warfare, European powers united against him. In 1815, Napoleon was defeated at the Battle of Waterloo, bringing an end to his empire. While political revolutions were reshaping governments, another transformation was occurring in the world of technology and production. This change is known as the Industrial Revolution. Beginning in Britain during the late 18th century, the Industrial Revolution introduced machines that could perform work far faster than human labor. Factories replaced traditional workshops, and steam-powered engines allowed industries to operate on a much larger scale. One of the key figures behind these innovations was James Watt, who improved the design of the steam engine and made it practical for widespread industrial use. Railroads soon spread across Europe and North America, allowing goods and people to move across long distances with unprecedented speed. Cities grew rapidly as workers moved from rural areas to find jobs in factories. Industrialization also encouraged new forms of communication and transportation. The invention of the telegraph allowed messages to travel across continents in minutes rather than weeks. Meanwhile, advances in medicine and public health gradually improved life expectancy. Yet the Industrial Revolution also brought serious challenges. Factory workers often faced harsh conditions, long hours, and low wages. As industrial cities expanded, pollution and overcrowding became major problems. These issues led to new political and economic ideas. Among the most influential critics of industrial capitalism was the philosopher Karl Marx. Marx argued that industrial societies were divided between wealthy owners and working laborers. He predicted that workers would eventually unite and create a new political system based on shared ownership of resources. Although Marx's predictions did not unfold exactly as he imagined, his ideas had enormous influence on political movements around the world. By the end of the 19th century, the balance of global power had shifted dramatically. Industrial nations in Europe had built powerful militaries and advanced economies. Many of these countries expanded their influence through overseas colonies, creating vast empires across Africa and Asia. This period of imperial expansion connected distant regions of the world more closely than ever before, but it also created tensions between competing powers. By 1900, humanity had entered a new technological age. Factories, railways, telegraphs, and steamships had transformed how people lived and worked. But these rapid changes also introduced rivalries and political pressures that would soon erupt into one of the most devastating conflicts in human history. The 20th century was about to begin, and with it would come wars, revolutions, and innovations that would reshape civilization once again. Chapter 13: World Wars and the Age of Global Conflict. 1900 to 1945. As the 20th century began, the world had entered an era of unprecedented industrial power and global connections. Railways crossed continents, steamships linked oceans, and telegraph cables allowed messages to travel across the globe within minutes. Yet beneath this progress, tensions between nations were steadily rising. European powers had built vast colonial empires across Africa and Asia. Rivalries over territory, resources, and political influence created an atmosphere of competition and suspicion. Military alliances formed between powerful nations, and new technologies were making warfare more destructive than ever before. These tensions finally erupted in 1914 with the outbreak of the World War I. The immediate trigger occurred when the Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated in the city of Sarajevo. His death set off a chain reaction among European alliances. Within weeks, major powers across Europe had entered the conflict. Two large coalitions formed. On one side were the Allied powers, including Britain, France, and Russia. Opposing them were the Central Powers, led by Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire. The war quickly turned into a brutal stalemate. Along the Western Front in Europe, armies dug massive trench systems stretching hundreds of kilometers. Soldiers faced constant artillery bombardments, machine gun fire, and poisonous gas attacks. Battles such as the Battle of the Somme and the Battle of Verdun caused enormous casualties, while producing very little territorial change. The war also spread beyond Europe. Naval battles took place across the oceans, and colonial forces fought in Africa and the Middle East. New technologies such as tanks, submarines, and military aircraft transformed the nature of warfare. In 1917, the conflict expanded further when the United States entered the war on the side of the Allies. By 1918, exhausted and facing economic collapse, the Central Powers began surrendering. The war officially ended with the signing of the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. World War I had caused enormous devastation. Millions of soldiers and civilians had died, and several empires collapsed as a result of the conflict. These included the Ottoman Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the Russian Empire. In Russia, the pressures of war contributed to a major political upheaval. In 1917, revolutionary movements overthrew the monarchy during the Russian Revolution. The revolutionary leader Vladimir Lenin and his Bolshevik Party established a socialist state that would later become the Soviet Union. While many hoped that the end of World War I would bring lasting peace, the post-war years were filled with uncertainty and economic hardship. The treaty imposed heavy financial penalties on Germany, and political instability spread across Europe. Then, in 1929, a severe economic crisis struck the global economy. This event, known as the Great Depression, caused widespread unemployment, poverty, and social unrest. During this period of instability, authoritarian leaders rose to power in several countries. In Germany, the nationalist politician Adolf Hitler and his Nazi Party gained support by promising economic recovery and national revival. In Italy, the fascist leader Benito Mussolini established a dictatorship that promoted militarism and aggressive expansion. In Asia, the Empire of Japan also began pursuing territorial conquest. These developments gradually pushed the world toward another major conflict. In 1939, Germany invaded Poland, triggering the outbreak of the World War II. Once again, global alliances formed. The Allied powers included Britain, the Soviet Union, the United States, and several other nations. Opposing them were the Axis powers, led by Germany, Italy, and Japan. World War II became the largest and most destructive conflict in human history. Battles took place across Europe, North Africa, and Asia. Entire cities were destroyed by aerial bombardments, and millions of civilians were caught in the violence. One of the darkest tragedies of the war was the Holocaust. During this genocide, the Nazi regime systematically murdered 6 million Jews along with millions of other victims in concentration camps across Europe. The war finally began turning in favor of the Allies after several key victories. In 1944, Allied forces launched a massive invasion of German-occupied France during the D-Day. Meanwhile, Soviet armies pushed westward across Eastern Europe toward Germany. In the Pacific, American forces fought intense battles against Japanese troops across island territories. The conflict reached its final stage in 1945. In August of that year, the United States dropped atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Shortly afterward, Japan surrendered. World War II had come to an end. The war left much of Europe and Asia in ruins. Tens of millions of people had lost their lives, and entire societies had been transformed. Yet even as the fighting ended, a new global rivalry was beginning to take shape. Two powerful nations had emerged from the war stronger than ever before. The United States and the Soviet Union would soon compete for influence in a tense political struggle that would define the next chapter of human civilization. Chapter 14: The Cold War and the Technological Age. 1945 to 1991. When the Second World War ended in 1945, the world stood exhausted from years of destruction. Cities across Europe and Asia lay in ruins, millions of people had been displaced, and entire economies had collapsed. Yet from the aftermath of war, a new global order began to emerge. Two nations had risen to unmatched levels of power and influence. One was the capitalist democracy of the United States. The other was the communist superpower known as the Soviet Union. Although these countries had fought on the same side during the war, their political systems and global ambitions were fundamentally different. This rivalry soon developed into a prolonged geopolitical struggle known as the Cold War. Unlike previous global conflicts, the Cold War was not defined by direct battles between the two superpowers. Instead, it was a tense competition involving political influence, military alliances, technological development, and ideological confrontation. Shortly after the war, Europe became divided between two spheres of influence. Western European nations received economic assistance from the United States through a recovery program known as the Marshall Plan. Meanwhile, Eastern European countries fell under the political influence of the Soviet Union, forming a bloc of communist states. This division eventually became symbolized by a political and military boundary known as the Iron Curtain. One of the most dramatic physical symbols of this division was the Berlin Wall, constructed in 1961 to separate the western and eastern sections of the German city of Berlin. The Cold War also triggered a massive arms race. Both superpowers developed increasingly powerful nuclear weapons capable of destroying entire cities. The fear of nuclear war created a tense balance of power known as mutually assured destruction. Despite these dangers, the Cold War was also a period of rapid technological progress. One area where the rivalry between superpowers became especially visible was space exploration. In 1957, the Soviet Union launched the first artificial satellite, called Sputnik 1, into orbit around the Earth. This achievement shocked the world and began a competition known as the space race. The United States soon accelerated its own space program. In 1969, the American spacecraft Apollo 11 successfully landed astronauts on the Moon. The mission was commanded by astronaut Neil Armstrong, who became the first human being to walk on the lunar surface. Space exploration became one of the most inspiring scientific achievements of the 20th century. Yet the Cold War was not limited to technological competition. Several regional conflicts around the world became battlegrounds where the two superpowers supported opposing sides. One of the longest and most intense of these conflicts was the Vietnam War. This war involved communist forces in North Vietnam and anti-communist forces in South Vietnam, supported by the United States and its allies. The conflict lasted for many years and caused enormous suffering before ending in 1975. Another major Cold War crisis occurred in 1962 during the Cuban Missile Crisis. During this confrontation, the Soviet Union attempted to install nuclear missiles in the Caribbean nation of Cuba. The United States responded with a naval blockade, and the world came dangerously close to nuclear war. After tense negotiations, the crisis was resolved and the missiles were removed. While global tensions dominated international politics, many countries were also experiencing dramatic social and political change. Across Africa and Asia, colonial territories began gaining independence from European powers. Dozens of new nations emerged during this period as former colonies established their own governments. At the same time, movements for civil rights and social equality were reshaping societies. In the United States, leaders such as Martin Luther King Jr. advocated for the end of racial segregation and discrimination through peaceful protest. These movements helped transform laws and public attitudes toward equality and human rights. By the late 20th century, the Cold War system itself began to weaken. Economic problems and political reform movements spread across the Soviet sphere of influence. In 1989, a dramatic moment occurred when citizens in East Germany began dismantling the Berlin Wall, symbolizing the collapse of communist control in Eastern Europe. Just 2 years later, in 1991, the Soviet Union officially dissolved. The Cold War had come to an end. For the first time in decades, the world was no longer divided between two rival superpower blocs. Yet the end of the Cold War did not mean the end of global challenges. Instead, humanity was entering a new era defined by globalization, digital technology, and rapidly changing societies. The next chapter of civilization would unfold in a world more interconnected than ever before. 1991 to the present. When the Soviet Union dissolved in 1991, the long geopolitical struggle known as the Cold War came to an end. For nearly half a century, global politics had been defined by the rivalry between two superpowers. With that rivalry gone, the international system entered a new and uncertain phase. The world was now becoming more interconnected than at any previous point in human history. Economic globalization accelerated rapidly during the final years of the 20th century. International trade expanded as companies began producing goods across multiple continents. Financial markets connected countries through investment and global supply chains. Organizations such as the United Nations and the World Trade Organization attempted to regulate international cooperation, diplomacy, and commerce. At the same time, technological innovation began transforming everyday life. One of the most important developments was the rapid expansion of the Internet. Originally developed through research networks during the late 20th century, the Internet soon became a global communication system linking billions of people. Information could now travel instantly across continents. New companies emerged that built their success around digital technology. Businesses such as Apple, Microsoft, Google, and Amazon helped create an entirely new digital economy. Smartphones placed powerful computers into the hands of ordinary people, allowing communication, navigation, and access to information from almost anywhere in the world. Social media platforms also began reshaping how individuals communicate and share ideas. Applications such as Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter allowed billions of people to publish content, participate in discussions, and connect with global audiences. These technologies dramatically increased the speed at which information and cultural trends spread across societies. Yet the modern world has also faced serious challenges. In 2001, a series of coordinated terrorist attacks occurred in the United States during the September 11 attacks. These events reshaped global security policies and led to years of international conflict focused on counterterrorism. Economic instability has also affected the global system. In 2008, a severe financial collapse triggered the global financial crisis, causing major recessions in many countries. Meanwhile, scientists and governments have increasingly focused on environmental challenges, such as climate change. Industrial development, deforestation, and fossil fuel use have contributed to rising global temperatures and shifting weather patterns. International agreements have attempted to address these concerns, though progress has often been difficult. One such effort is the Paris Climate Agreement, signed in 2015 by many nations seeking to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and limit global warming. The early 21st century has also been marked by rapid scientific and medical breakthroughs. Advances in genetics, biotechnology, and artificial intelligence are expanding humanity's understanding of life and the universe. researchers continue exploring possibilities that earlier generations could scarcely imagine. Private companies and government space agencies have also renewed interest in space exploration. Organizations such as SpaceX and the NASA are developing technologies that may allow humans to return to the moon and possibly travel to Mars in the coming decades. These efforts represent the continuation of humanity's long tradition of exploration and discovery. At the same time, global events continue to remind people of shared vulnerabilities. In 2020, the outbreak of the disease known as COVID-19 spread rapidly across the planet, creating one of the largest global health crises in modern history. Governments implemented emergency measures, scientists raced to develop vaccines, and societies adapted to new ways of working and communicating. The pandemic demonstrated how deeply interconnected modern civilization has become. Today, humanity stands at a unique moment in history. After thousands of years of migration, empire building, technological innovation, and cultural exchange, the world is now linked through communication networks, global trade, and shared challenges. Human civilization has evolved from small bands of hunter-gatherers into a planetary society of billions of individuals. Our ancestors built cities, explored oceans, developed science, and created systems of knowledge that have carried humanity forward through countless generations. The story of civilization is not only a record of wars and empires, but also a story of creativity, cooperation, and resilience. And unlike the chapters that came before, the next chapter of human civilization has not yet been written. It will be shaped by the decisions, discoveries, and ambitions of the people living today. The long journey that began with the earliest humans thousands of years ago continues. And the future of humanity remains one of the greatest stories still unfolding.